So first, thank you to my colleagues for including me in organizing and being a part of this. My name is Sarah Abramson. I am the Executive Director of C10 Research and Education Foundation. And the story that I'll tell today, C10 is the protagonist, and the other characters are the local nuclear power plant in Seabrook, New Hampshire, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, elected officials, the media, the public, and various experts. The story has been described to be similar to David and Goliath, and this metaphor highlights how the Davids of the world, the public and us advocates, can feel like taking on the big corporation or the regulator is a futile task. And the Goliaths of the world, in this case, the company and the NRC, might feel like they can operate unabated without having to worry about what we think about what they're doing. So what can we do? We can pick up a slingshot and we can start chucking stones. And how do we make sure that those stones hit their target? I'll borrow this formula, which describes what we lovingly call the three-legged stool. So you'll see advocacy groups plus engagement with legislators and media, and also engaging subject matter experts can yield results. So about C10, we were formed in 1991, essentially when the Seabrook nuclear power plant came online. And we have a mission that focuses on three pillars. We operate a real-time radiological monitoring network. So a couple presenters in the past have talked about the technology that's out there to do sophisticated minute-by-minute real-time monitoring that can be automatically reported to a database or alert health officials if there's a spike. We do that exact type of radiation monitoring in our communities. We're also a watchdog and a safety group. We look out for things like the decommissioning rule changes that were proposed that strip away public involvement opportunities. We also serve as a trusted source of information for those legislators, for members of the media, and for the public. And we do our best to hold the corporations and the regulators responsible and accountable for what they are required to do, which is maintain public safety and environmental safety. So the issue in this story was seeking stronger oversight of the Seabrook nuclear power plant's degrading concrete. This is after a spattering of historical issues at the plant: fire safety violations, emergency planning shortcomings, incidental killing of nearly 100 baby seals, but none were so serious and dire as this concrete issue caused by alkali silica reaction, and we refer to it as concrete cancer. And it's happening at this plant because of the types of aggregates that were used in the concrete when the plant was built over 30 years ago. There is no known cure, just a promise that it will get worse with time. And this is the only US plant known to have this problem right now. And only 2 other nuclear plants in the world can make the same claim. And they are no longer in operation. So in 2014, the owners of the Seabrook nuclear power plant rushed to renew their operating license, 14 years ahead of their 2030 license expiration date. And this was before this ASR issue had been fully evaluated. In 2017, the NRC approved the plant's license renewal request, which included scant and pretty relaxed requirements related to this concrete issue. So C10's concern: these requirements did not appear to be scientifically based. And if they were, like some of our panelists have said before, we didn't have access to all of the documentations and the justifications from the plant's owners on how they came up with this plan. And the requirements, weren't very shocking. We just covered how the NRC and nuclear industry often tells us that we, the public, are unknowledgeable and therefore unqualified to weigh in on nuclear safety matters. But in this case, they made these decisions in relative isolation, or should I say in most cases, they make these decisions in a vacuum, and they're setting rules for this scientific problem, this ASR concrete cancer, for which they themselves have absolutely no expertise. So this is where C10 embraced the David role And our first slingshot stone that we fired was bringing a formal legal challenge to the NRC's approval of that license renewal. So also enter elected leaders, the media, public support, and subject matter experts. And I also want to note that because of the Administrative Policy Act, we, the public, have to convince the agency to let us sue them, to let us legally intervene on a decision that they've made. So we had to prove to the NRC, appeal to a particular panel, that they, meaning the folks in the NRC who approved the license renewal, weren't doing a good enough job. So that's a pretty high bar to convince an agency to let you sue them. And that's a big problem from the public engagement perspective. So how do you get the elected officials aligned with you? Be substantive and be honest. And if you're making a claim, do your best to make sure that it's fact-based, because if they repeat that claim, later when they're advocating for you and it's not true, the corporations and the lobbyists will kind of tear them apart. So we've been sure to make sure that we were evidence-based in our arguments. And no matter what the nuclear industry might say about feelings being meaningless in decision-making, fear and discomfort, can drive quality of life and also economic factors. We talk about Pilgrim. If people think that the fish and the seafood products there are irradiated, that's a feeling, but it might result in a pretty big economic impact to their community. And the same could be said for the seafood community. We're similarly coastally aligned. And we don't ignore a politician or a media outlet just because they're pro-nuclear, either stated that themselves or we think that's the case, because they can be pro-safety at the same time and very well may support your cause, especially if you bring to it all of the things that I've mentioned. So we try to spend more time with our legislators talking about the things that we agree on and less time on the things that we don't. So reaching the media and the public. So getting media attention, ringing the bell and ringing it loudly. When we wanted to interrupt that license renewal, or at least interrupt the very relaxed standards related to the concrete issue, we stayed laser focused on the concrete issue. This was the thing, this was the bullet, that could actually pierce that corporate veil. And so we stayed really focused on it and tried to stay out of the anti-nuclear or a political fray. We set the urgency that this legal case would be setting precedent. A victory here could mean better handling of ASR when it's discovered at other nuclear plants. Plus, we had nothing to lose. If we lost, then we're stuck with the same bad rules that were already being played in the game by the nuclear power plant. And the last leg of the stool, the secret sauce, as we call it, is subject matter experts. They bring legitimacy to your argument and, in a legal case, bring compelling evidence. They're the game changers. We had an attorney, Diane Curran, that specializes in Nuclear Regulatory Commission cases. She offered to work with us. Luckily, the media attention was also heightened when a subject matter expert, Dr. Victor Salma, contacted us. And that was in part because we had already been doing the best we could to get media involved and get the word out. So he found us because we were ringing that bell so loudly already. We also had former Union of Concerned Scientists nuclear expert David Lochbaum, and we got a lot of gratis free help from these people, or at least reduced costs. The public engagement knob had to be turned way up, and the onus was unfortunately on us to do that. Mostly volunteers taking time out of their day to read hundreds of pages about concrete. And we had to try to raise money to fund this legal case. They're not cheap, so poor communities are even more unable to kind of reach that super high bar that I talked about. And also to make sure that we could garner the support from the elected officials and the public at large. So what were the results? After a couple of years of fighting this battle, it culminated in a ruling in favor of a lot of our asks. it didn't go as far as we asked, but it still went way further than the original license renewal requirements. Instead of checking on the concrete cracks and how bad they're getting every 10 years, that's what was in the license renewal, they now have to check them every 6 months. That is a huge difference. If the cracking moves faster than we thought, if now that we're checking it, we find that the trend is really scary and fast, then we have to pump the brakes, and the NRC can come back and give an even stricter rule. Maybe you have to check it every 3 months. The plant also has to watch for impacts to the rebar. They have to use petrographic analysis, which is much more advanced than the old look-see approach that they were trying to get by with before. And so we were happy with the things that we were able to take away from this legal victory. So the secret sauce, the three-legged stool, as I said, it's the formula that you may have already recognized in other stories that you've heard today. And it's really simple, and I'm just laying it out in this with plus sign, equal sign format. And sometimes as advocates, we can be so immersed in the details that we forget that not everybody knows what we know, or we can have a blind spot because we've become pseudo experts in certain scientific aspects that we might not, be professional in. And so we might neglect to reach out to those subject matter experts. But there's a very vibrant and accessible scientific community that is willing and able and eager, and sometimes for free, will help you make these cases.
Just another minute here, Sarah.
Thanks. This is my last slide, I think. So we also noticed that you shouldn't count out the regulators. You'll see some quotes here. We've been granted access, or we've kind of earned or just asked, kicked down the door to get access to resident inspectors, to certain boards, licensing boards, and technical experts in the NRC. And we email, we call, we try to get them on the phone with us. And they've even told us that sometimes a Zoom or a phone call is a better avenue to get information than a written request or asking them on the spot at a formal hearing or a formal meeting, because there's so much legality and other arms of tentacles of the NRC or the industry will try to shut down that candor from people who are willing to speak the truth. So try to nurture those relationships and find the people that will give you their cell phone and talk to them, because they'll tell you way more than you think they might tell you. Are all of the NRC reps that you reach out to going to give you this level of attention? No, but it's worth trying because you can get a few. And we take away what we can from the relationship. Sometimes you'll be talking to them and you'll hear something that is sort of being opaque on purpose, and you just push. But if they're not going to break, or they might even tell you, I can't tell you more about that. Then you just move on to something and try to probe and see what they will tell you. And so what we take away is that combining these different strategies into one cohesive combined strategy is a good footprint for trying to make your effort, your public engagement more effective.
Thank you, Sarah. That's a really good model for a lot of communities and organizations and activists to be following. So